Anna Seewald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joint parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. Today, raising kids while doing your own work. My guest for this episode is one of my listeners. Not just any listener, a loyal, dedicated, diligent listener who has consumed the entire content of the podcast. Yes, you've heard me right. In case you're new to the show, the podcast is 7 years old, and that means there is a lot to explore. It was a few years ago when she first contacted me to share about her methodical approach to listening. I was surprised and intrigued. I've been committed to the show diligently myself, and to discover that there was another person equally dedicated and diligent on the other side was truthfully delightful. To me, this is a one-person social experiment of sorts. Wouldn't you agree? About the effectiveness of the podcast. What lessons has she learned? How has her life changed? In what ways has she grown? What concrete things has she applied from the show into her parenting? Has she seen results? Was it all worth it in the end? Has she gotten tired of me and my voice? Where is she now? And what's next for her? She has appeared on the podcast before. Her name is Lihia. She became a mom at age 41. And she has a 9-year-old daughter who has been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. We did an on-air coaching call with her a couple of years ago, and you may know her from our support calls as well. I don't know about you, but as an avid podcast listener myself, when I discover a new show, I quickly skim through some of the catalog to see if the topics or guests interest me. Then I start with the latest episode. Lihia had the complete opposite approach. She started from the beginning and listened in order, which is pretty remarkable. And I think she might be the only listener who has approached the show that way. So as you listen to this episode today, think of how you have grown and changed through parenthood. Yes, I am assigning homework. If the podcast has played a role in that process, include what you have learned. You are a cycle breaker. In what ways have you come to do it differently than your parents? What have you worked on? How have you grown? What skills have you cultivated? How has your parenting evolved over the years? Ideally, I would love it if you could take some time to reflect and think about these questions and journal. Yes, writing is really powerful. Doing your own work while parenting is hard. Stay on course. Be gentle and easy on yourself. It's a worthwhile journey. Continue learning and growing, and pause to recognize and celebrate your wins along the way. Please enjoy. Lihia, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Anna. So happy to be back.
I know. I'm excited to hear your voice once again. You are probably the only listener who has listened to the entire catalog of this podcast. I think that's so special and so rare. I am just beyond grateful, excited when you called me on the phone to tell me that you finished the latest episode and I know you had started from the beginning. It was this incredible feeling that, well, there is another crazy person besides me who cares about this podcast. Like, I am dedicated and devoted to work on this podcast and bring it to life. oh, there is another person who listened to all of the conversations. So you're very, very special for me in that respect. So thank you for being here and wanting to share what you learned from listening to all the episodes.
Yeah, the other way around, Anna. I appreciate you so much and all the wonderful content you put out there. And yes, I am a freak. I've been called intense in the past, and I have intensely ventured on this parenting journey for me. I only mean this in I don't mean this in a negative way whatsoever, but I wasn't prepared to be a parent. It's not something I had planned to do. I was a surprise parent at 41. And it took me a while for the idea to sink in. I didn't feel I had the tools to be a good parent. I was quite cynical about the world and whether or not I wanted to bring a child into it. And once she was on her way, what a wonderful miracle and a perfect teacher she has been to me for me. When I think about how my life would have been lacking if I had not had my daughter, all the lessons I've learned, how being a parent has forced me to grow in ways I would have never been able to grow otherwise, because my perspective would have never been the same, had she not been here. But when I found that I was going to be a parent, I was desperate to figure it out, desperate to find ways to not repeat the hurt that was done to me, whether it was, it wasn't done on purpose. It was ignorant and unconscious, but I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to be an ignorant or unconscious parent. So I definitely went overboard. I read as much as I could for the first couple years. And I found that reading was not necessarily, it was not the best way for me to learn while I was in the gig of parenting. I didn't have much time to read. It was a little harder for me to work it into my day and to regularly try to learn skills that I could put into practice. And then I found podcasts. I think my daughter must have been around 5 when I did. And I found another parenting podcast first. I don't know if I should mention which one it is on air or not.
You can mention it.
She's great. Let's just say she's great and I love her, but she had you on one time.
Okay.
And that brought me to you. And
Yay!
then I took a look at your all that you had already published, because I think you'd already been publishing for about 5 years. It's taken me like 3 years to go through all your content. Imagine that. It took you 7 years to produce and 3 years for me to listen to, because I did listen to it in order, because my approach from the beginning has been, and when we first talked on air and you told me that you thought of it as a course and you as a syllable, and you planned it out, it completely clicked with me, because that's how I approached it, just intuitively. I thought, well, if this is a skill I'm going to learn, I need to go to the beginning. And I know it's a little fanatical, a little crazy, but I went and there were podcasts that were not on the app, but were on your website. So I went as far back as I could on your website, and I started from there. I think it was like episode 40 something or 60 something. And so there are like the first 50 or so that I haven't listened to, but everything that I could get my hands on, I listened to. And it just, I went with the flow of my life, and it's what made sense for me. And I think it's what everyone should do, whatever makes sense for them. It's if, scrolling through the relevant topics that address the issues that they need help with in the moment, if that's what works for you, that's what you should do. I was just being kind of faithful to my methodology and how I felt I could best learn this skill that I was so desperate to hone, right? Which is parenting.
What were your first ahas when you listened to a few episodes?
It took me a while to get to my first aha moments, because I don't know if it happens to any of your other listeners, but I can understand something intellectually or mentally, but putting it into practice is so far removed from that, especially when you're dysregulated yourself and it's so hard for you to access whatever you might have learned. So it was a little bit before you and I first talked, when we had an online, on air coaching call, that, and I'm sorry, I don't quite remember what podcast it was that I was listening to, but the control issue was a major one. And that was my first aha, when I was able to put the idea of me controlling myself and making sure that I was taking care of myself and not control the circumstances or my daughter was a big moment for me. And I actually put it into practice and it worked. Just the fact that I wasn't this constant stressor to her, she was able to respond differently to what the ask was, because I wasn't nagging her and in particular it was transitional stuff, like when she got home from school and what she was expected to do when she got home from school versus how she would like to do things, put away things, get ready for the rest of the day away from school, make preparations for the next day, just a kind of chore kind of stuff. So I decided to put it into practice and not question it, not be driven by need to be this perfect, run this perfect household and have this perfect daughter that does everything perfectly. And I just started giving her a little slack and thinking, oh, well, she has to put her shoes away, her jacket away, her lunchbox, and her book bag. Those are the 4 things she has to do every day when we come home from school. And she wouldn't do them right away after getting home from school. And maybe I had to nag her several times. So one day I just decided not to tell her anything. And eventually she did them on her own. And there was no conflict that day. That was a big aha for me, when I was able to put into practice something that made sense logically, but I had, for some reason, a aversion to trying it. I just wanted to hold on to my old patterns and my old mechanism of operating, where I just operated off of control. That was a big aha for me.
What are some lessons that you have learned by listening to all the episodes? I'm going to also ask you another question about concrete things that you learned and applied, like the control thing. But I also want to know, what are some major life lessons, important things that you learned that are not tangible things necessarily, like a concrete strategy or a tip or a tool, but lessons that you can list?
I think the concept of compassion, even though it's really in vogue now, is something that was introduced to my life through your podcast kind of relatively early in relation to how it's really like a hot topic right now. Not just compassion for myself, but for my daughter, but also for my parents and whatever pain I'm still kind of nursing from that. And the concept of, I know you don't like the term reparenting, but the concept of feeling what I'm feeling too, not just allowing my daughter to be angry or sad or upset and letting her deal with her emotions, but me letting myself deal with my emotions, my feelings of abandonment or sadness or whatever I might have gone through my past, actually feeling them so they can go on their way. They can be felt and go on their way. What other lessons have I learned? I've also, there are things that you kind of know, but there's such a big gap between knowing it and feeling it in your core. The fact that we're all on the same boat. That for me is it's a feeling that it's a concept that makes me feel a little more at ease with being a parent and recognizing that it's hard and we're all on the same boat. So it's tied into compassion and giving not just myself a break, but others a break too, meaning my family or whomever I'm interacting with, and slowly developing emotional intelligence, right? Something that, I've always been a dunce at. I feel that emotional intelligence is something that very few are born with, and even fewer people are kind of taught. One thing that I love about my daughter's school right now is that they have an SEL class where they are learning these things. They're learning to not live in the little bubbles we all tend to, and see things just through our filter, and think about the fact that well, maybe my daughter's having a hard time today because someone bullied her at school, or she hasn't had lunch, or she didn't sleep quite well, or maybe she's coming down with something, and it's more than her just wanting to be contrary. Because, like many of your guests have said, a child and everyone really is going to do as well as they can in the moment, given the circumstances. So those are kind of life lessons that I didn't necessarily grow up with, and I think a lot of people might experience this when they grew up. It didn't matter what they were feeling or what they were going through. They had to do as they were asked in the moment. They were asked to do it in the manner they were asked to do it. So I'm kind of retraining myself to not follow old patterns and to think, well, oh, she's being disrespectful. She's not treating me like she should because she's my daughter, trying to distance myself from all those roles and those expectations. Those are lessons that through the practice of listening daily slowly start to seep in, because it's not something that you read a book and you automatically are changed, or, you listen one time and once a month. And the constant presence of having such an enormous source, such a giant well of information. And it felt like I was always going to have more stuff to listen to. And I listened to a lot of your episodes more than once, if it was a topic that I thought that I particularly needed. So that was just awesome. It was like this well that I could always go to and know that I could quench my thirst.
Wow. What are some episodes, the recent ones maybe, that you re-listened? Name a few episodes that you listened more than once. I'm curious.
I'm going to have to bring up, because I have to admit to you, Anna, today I'm not on my top form. So let's see. The one I did listen to twice recently, and it was because his interpretation, it was Gabor Mate's son, Daniel. I listened to that one twice, and what really intrigues me, and I'm an older parent, and I don't know that I'm going to have longer time with my daughter as an adult than a child. We never know what's around the corner. But his interpretation of how his parent, because something that you helped me see when we had our online coaching session is that I had all these fears and all these anxieties about my daughter's life. And you asked me if I thought I was projecting my issues onto her. And I never really been asked that question. I never really pondered on it. And after we finished our online coaching, I had to think about it. And absolutely, I can only filter what I think is happening to her through my experiences. I think it would be kind of unfair to ask anyone not to do that, because I'm me after all. I'm not someone else. So I can only filter what's happening to her through me, but at least it gave me the notion that I have to make sure that I seeing things through her needs. Like right now, for instance, I don't know if your listeners might remember, but my daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes last year. And when you have one autoimmune disease, you're more likely to have more. So since she was diagnosed, she's been screened for others. And it looks like she probably has celiac also. And she got a pretty high score in her blood work that to me says that further diagnostics like a biopsy through an endoscopy would not be necessary. But the GI specialist wants an endoscopy. So I don't want to get one. I have all these anxieties about her getting one. But I involved her in the decision process and I explained to her as best as I could, an 8-year-old, what it would mean. And if she wanted one, and she wants one. So now I have to figure out if that's the right thing for her. Because even though she wants it and I'm trying to respect her perspective and not project my issues onto her, I need to, as the adult in the relationship, make sure that her reasons are valid. So we're getting help with her teacher in finding out exactly why she wants one and whether or not we're going to go through it. But that's something that I learned through listening to your podcast and in our conversation. And one of the recent episodes I listened to is Daniel's episode, because I was really interested in seeing how his particular personality interpreted the circumstances in which he grew up with his dad, right, and his issues. And I found it really interesting. He's very self-aware, and I was just trying to pick up little pointers of how it's so important to respect your children for who they are, and when they're so little, though, it's hard. It's hard. I do try to, when she pushes back, my signal right now is when she pushes back. When she pushes back a little bit, then I stop and I try to get curious. But it's been so long, Anna, and trying to do that, and I'm just finally doing that. Like I said, I've been listening to your podcast for about 3 years, and I'm just now starting to be able to recognize that and put into practice what I learned. So I would tell your listeners to hang in there. This is definitely like learning a new language. You have to practice and give yourself a break and tell yourself, I'm learning. I'm a student, and this is going to take me a while. And forgive yourself and repair. You said you were going to ask me what particular things I learned. And would it be okay if I went into that now?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So the repair part has been crucial to me. And I just repeat a little mantra in my head that you said, that it's, as long as you do it well, I think it's like 30% of the time you'll be okay. Yeah. Because man, do I mess up sometimes. At least I've never hit her, thank God, which is what was done to me quite a lot. But I have screamed at her, and I sometimes judge her with my words, and I'm trying really hard not to do that. But I didn't think it was enough, because I felt that it was just excuses. And I don't know, I think that as a child, I wouldn't want to hear from my parent, I'm sorry, I lost my cool because of this and this and that. Part of me is still not quite convinced about the repair, but I've been using it, and it seems to be okay. I tried to explain to her why it's so challenging for me, and I always tell her, this is not your fault. This is all on me, and I'm going to keep trying.
Can I ask you a question about that? I think you're raising a really important and valid point, and maybe other people are questioning that part. When you do the repair, you just said, from a child's perspective, if you were the child and your parent apologized and did the repair, like, what is it about that doesn't sit well with you, that you're still skeptical? What part of it? Is it because the parent is not so confident and competent that they need to apologize, that they made a mistake? What is it about it? I'm really curious.
That's a great question. And I hadn't been curious enough about why it didn't really sit well with me. And I think I know the answer. My parents had me when they were very young, and they're still fairly young. They're just 70. My mom hasn't even, she'll be 70 in December. And it's because for them, the addict of you're going to have longer with your children as adults than children does apply, because they had me when they were so young. And our adult relationship has been so rocky, as when I was a child, I did whatever they said. I had no other option. But as an adult, I've kind of rocked the boat a little more. And I've been very direct with them in what I feel needs to happen in order for our relationship to improve. And they just don't try. And when they do, it just feels like empty words. So I think that's why.
Wow. Yeah, I can see that. So, but when you,
I just feel so sorry for my daughter, because my problems shouldn't be her problems. She shouldn't have to deal with getting screamed at and belittled and then being asked to be forgiven. And it seems like a cop-out to me. I just want to get to the point where I don't do it at all. That's my goal, to get to that point where I don't have anything to apologize for, because I'm a grown-up. I'm not this hurt child.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so much I can say to those comments, but I want to keep it to, and maybe we should record a podcast about this, because this is so big. No, I agree.
I'm just still I'm just still dealing with a lot of ghosts.
Yeah.
Still dealing
That's
with a lot of
I
ghosts.
think yeah, that's a separate thing, but being an imperfect parent and messing up and making mistakes, whether we yelled or we did something wrong, or the repair, I think, is part of healthy relationships, but it has to be done in a genuine way, right? And yeah, well, I'm gonna do an episode about this. My fireworks in my brain are just going, but
I do it in a genuine way at the moment. If I was my daughter, and again, this is my filter on it, I don't know that she feels this way, I would just want to tell me, then just don't effing do it again. Just don't do it again.
but what if you could ask your daughter, what's her perspective on that? What if you said, how do you feel when I apologize and I whatever language you use with your kid? Obviously, your kid is younger. What if you asked her opinion, how she feels about it? Does it make you more human? Does it normalize making mistakes? Or she thinks that, oh my gosh, my mom keeps saying, I'm not going to mess up. I don't know. I messed up, whatever. And she keeps doing it. Or, I would love for you to ask that if you have the courage that is
Okay. No, I will. I just don't know. She's not the most talkative. I'm always pressing her to tell me how she feels and what she thinks about things. And she's not like me in that sense. And so that's part of respecting who she is, right? If she doesn't want to talk about something, then I try not to, but I will. I'll ask her what she thinks of that. What I do try to do to kind of compensate that, the fact that I'm not fully on board with the repair, is that I tell her, I don't tell her I'll never do it again. I tell her I'll keep trying.
Yeah,
I'll never stop trying.
I think the word never has to come out of the sentence, because that's not realistic. I think we want to convey that. I mean, and there are parents who, and of course, as a parent, you want to keep yourself to I don't want to say to a standard, but you do want to keep yourself accountable.
Well, I'm
if,
the
if
parent,
you keep,
not the child. Yeah.
if you keep making the same mistake every day a million times, then maybe that's not repair that it requires. Maybe that's an issue you need to work on yourself in a therapy session. You know what I mean? When we say repair, it's about the day-to-day interactions, mishaps, miscommunications that happen. But if it's really like, if you beat the shit out of your kids, not you, just in general, if somebody makes a horrendous parenting mistake and you keep apologizing for it, first of all, it doesn't mean anything. You lose confidence in yourself. You lose respect for yourself because you keep making the same gigantic mistake. And if it's, of course, unconscious, right? It's not like you choose to make that mistake. So that's clearly a sign that there is trauma involved. You need to get some help with that. What I'm talking about, or when we're talking about on the podcast, is more like day-to-day things that we do, the repair, and normalize making mistakes and apologizing and repairing, and hopefully not making the same mistake again. But if it's a severe pattern, I think that requires more serious work, because then you're right. Your child at some point not take you seriously, right? And they may not see the growth that you put into it. This is a very interesting topic. Yeah. All I can say.
Yeah, just to close it quickly, the repair, I do repair when they're like little things, like you said, everyday things. And I also repair with big things. And the big thing for me is screaming at her. I don't want to scream at her. I want to work really hard and not screaming at her. And I'll scream at her, like bitch her out, like maybe 6 or 7 times a year. But that's way more than I like, because her reaction is very interesting to me. So she reacts as if I'm beating her. She cowers for me, and she starts trembling, and she looks at me in this way. Like, her reaction to me compared to how I had it is an overreaction. that means she's very sensitive, I guess. She's really sensitive, and she's also not used to me treating her like that, because I don't treat her like that often. But
And so can I ask you another question then? So when repair happens, you said that your daughter is not talkative and she doesn't share much about her feelings and internal life, things like that. So when the repair happens, have you observed her body language, like her shoulders relax, her facial expression to change? Do you notice that it makes a difference? It lands on her, that she becomes, relaxed or safe or
yeah,
do you notice anything like that?
yeah. And part of our repair is that we hug. We hug, and we hugged for a prolonged time. And I tell her, look, I feel so awful. I feel terrible. I need your hug to make me feel better. And I tell her that it's for me, but I also, like you said, I want to make sure that she's okay. And yes, her composure, she's composed again, and she breathes normally, and I will keep talking, and something else will come up, and she'll change the topic. And then I'll bring it up again that evening, and I'll say, wow, do you remember how crazy I was? So to make a very tangible example, my husband was out of town, and I was a single parent for close to 2 weeks, and I was kind of stressed, and I was tired, and it was a Friday, and I was looking forward to just sitting down with her, curling up in the sofa and watching a movie. We usually watch a movie Friday nights, and we order in. But she was so hyper, and with the dog, and I had a glass of wine, and she was just running around, and her and the dog they poured all over me and the sofa and everything. And I turned into Mr. Hyde. I started screaming, and I was just so upset. It lasted about 40 seconds. It was kind of long. And then I just sat in the stairs with my hands on my face, and I was telling her, I feel awful right now. I feel like such a terrible mom right now. It doesn't matter what you did. I should have never done that. And she was crying and crying and crying. And then, I just talked to her from far away from the stairs. And then eventually I got close enough to her, and looked her in the eye, and I told her, I'm so sorry I hurt you. And I don't know what I have to do, but I'm going to keep trying. And then we hugged. And then eventually, like 5 minutes later, we watched the movie, and we had dinner, and everything was fine. But it's those kind of crazy explosions that I know come from my past.
Yes, they do. And you keep working on them because you had a plan, you had this perfect idea that this is how it's going to go. And of course it didn't go according to your plan. And maybe like analyzing it, know that that's your pattern, and these are the triggering situations when you're clinging to your own agenda, clinging to your own how I want things to go. Know that, but what if it doesn't go the way I want to? Maybe generate another perspective in your mind. There's so many things you can do to prevent this. You can even journal, and we can talk about this, but I think this is a good example. But one thing I want to comment on, I don't want to let it go. What if you were the kid? I know your parents were not like that. They didn't apologize, and they were parenting you differently. But hypothetically, imagine that your mom yelled at you and apologized and said the things that you said to your daughter. And in the end, she said, give me a hug. I need a hug right now to make me feel better. How would you respond to that statement?
Oh, not well, because I can only filter it through my experience as her daughter now. She's still around, and my parents don't hug me. And I would reject it. My daughter doesn't reject it from me, but what you're saying is that I shouldn't put the weight on her to try to relieve me of my feelings.
Yes, is that what you're saying? That is exactly what I'm saying. Yes, I think you do want to be careful. You do want to be careful. We all want to be careful with our kids, right? We don't want to say, give me a hug because mommy is feeling a certain way. And of course, she's going to come and give you the hug because she wants you to be happy. You're her mommy. She will do anything for you not to be that crazy, screaming, frantic mom, right? So, but is it fair? Is it her responsibility? I think it's a very, very dangerous territory. And I think we need to be aware of that. You can reframe it. You can say, how about we make up and give each other a hug? Even though you're doing it for you, I think the phrasing has to change so that she's not saving you, rescuing you, or taking care of you, because that's a heavy burden.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, what's funny is that I do it so that I can help her feel better through the hug, because, you know, they say that after hugging, after 10 seconds or so, all these feel good chemicals get released into your body. So I actually do it with the intention to help her calm down. But I said that it was for me to kind of, I don't know what I was thinking, but you're right. I'll definitely rephrase how I do it next time, and hopefully it'll be a long time before the next time, Anna.
Of
Because
course,
it
seven
breaks
times.
me.
Listen, 7 times a year is not that much. Number one,
It's ugh. It's just so gross. I just want to be better than that. But anyway, I tend to talk too much, Anna. So what you were asking me were tangible lessons I learned. Something really important too that I learned through your podcast is to let them feel their feelings, and to kind of describe what they're feeling, or suggest what they might be feeling, and say, I'll say stuff now that she's older. She'll be 9 soon. I'll say, you must be feeling angry and frustrated with me right now, because I said, like last night, she wanted to have dessert kind of late. And because of her type 1 diabetes, I don't like for her to have dessert within 3 hours of bedtime. So I told her, I know you must be disappointed and angry with me telling you no, but I have to hold this boundary because I need to take care of you. And you're allowed to feel angry, and that's okay. You can feel angry. And that's worked whenever she's wanted something that she can't have, or whatever she's there, wherever there might be some sort of rub between what she wants and what's right, or what I need for her to do in the moment. That's really helped us in practice. Also, just kind of letting go of certain things, like if I want the house to be picked up and perfect and she's not ready to do her chores, then I just kind of give her a break, and I try to shake off whatever perfectionistic and controlling tendencies there might be in me, and just it's hard, but try to just let go of them. What other things in practice have I learned? Also to kind of think ahead, right? So if I know that, and this I did from the time she was younger, make sure that she slept enough, that she has eaten, that I have something handy. A lot of times when she was younger, I wouldn't take her shopping or to the mall, because try to put her in circumstances where she's not going to be her best, or maybe I'm not going to be her best. I try not to put us in circumstances where we're kind of we're down to the last thread, where we're really both challenged.
Yeah, that's a good one. So these are some great lessons. I'm going to ask you a fun question now. What are some phrases that I repeat frequently that annoy you, or maybe they don't annoy you, but you know that I say very frequently? I mean, if you listen to all of the episodes, I'm sure I'm the same person, right? I know something I say a lot, one word, but I'm curious if, as a listener, you can say the same. You have the same response.
I can't. Nothing comes to mind right now about the one word. What I have noticed that you do, and it's not a bad thing at all. It's not even a quirk. It's just you describe things with several adjectives. You won't say that something is challenging. You'll say that it's challenging and it's costly at the moment. You'll describe it. I don't know how else what better example to make, but you'll describe things in at least 3 adjectives. You tend to do that, but I think it just expands on on the message you're trying to deliver, right? What's a word that you use often, Anna? What is it? What do you think it is?
I think I use the word perhaps very frequently. When I listen back to the episodes, I'm like, oh no, I said it again. Perhaps. Yeah.
But it's one of those words like but and, it's a word that's going to be repeated often, I think, or then, and so.
Yeah. So what is one big theme or message or through line that you've noticed through the years or through the entire catalog that you've listened to?
I think at the core is is that there's no one size fits all, and we have to be brave enough to know who we are and try to get to our authentic self. And I mean, authenticity, and you were so clear perhaps in the beginning with what you intended in naming the podcast and in introduced in the intro to the podcast. And I would say that you've been very consistent in the name and the introduction. This is really about what forged us and what we as parents need to work on so that we can be there for our kids and not flip out instead of not join their drama, but be part of the calm. I forget what the phrase is, what the phrase that, the everybody in the parenting industry uses in regards to the drama and the calm. But yeah, absolutely trying to figure out who we are authentically and respect that and honor that, and try to figure out who our children, let our children be as authentic as they can be. And then that there's no one size fits all solution to the problem. There's not a 3 steps to resolve any particular issue. It requires a little more patience and analysis and curiosity.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a diluted response to your question.
No,
Sorry.
I think it's an excellent, no, don't be hard on yourself. I'm noticing a through line that you're very hard on yourself, even when you succeed, even when we have to work on,
No,
this.
it's just that I'm having a hard time concentrating today, and I'm not sure if I answered that concisely.
That's okay. But no, I don't want you to be hard on yourself, whether as a parent or as a communicator, as a podcast listener. No, self-compassion is important. And even if you mess up, even if you don't do things correctly or the right way, quote unquote, like that's one thing. If you were to ask me what I learned, like I learned a lot of things through podcasting, but one thing I learned is not to be a perfectionist, not to be judgmental. I make mistakes. I'm not a native English speaker and all of that. I learned that, doing this imperfectly is good enough. And people love it and they listen and they come back. And I keep coming back because of it. If I was to be perfect and hard on myself, I would never release a single episode, believe me. And that is the biggest lesson that this podcasting has taught me, to be okay with perfection, not be perfections, imperfections, and not be hard on myself or judge myself. And another one I was just thinking today is I was listening back to an episode with someone that I did. And during the interview, I was sitting so judgmental of myself. I was so not present. I was so criticizing my own questions. I'm like, I should have asked this. Why am I asking this? I had so much inner chatter going on during the interview. Usually that's not the case. Usually I'm very present and mindful and I pay attention and listen. It's an invitation to be present doing the podcast. But sometimes there are interviews that I can judge the guest, for example, or I can judge myself. I'm like, oh my gosh, why did I say that? I should have never said that. Was my tone rude? I can be like that, right? Then I'm listening to the podcast back that is already edited, and I don't hear any of that in the episode. I'm like, wait, what? Was that all in my head? And it didn't.
Depending on the day we're having, right?
Yes. And it clearly, I learned that much of the noise and cacophony is in our head. And when I hear myself, I'm like, wow, I asked really like my anxiety, my nervousness, or my judgmentalness didn't come through. My criticalness of myself didn't come through. My voice was still the same. My questions were still the same. But inside, I was not feeling like that. And so there is a big discrepancy. And I learned that most of the stuff is in our head.
Absolutely. Today, my head is not screwed on properly. That's why I think I want to just double check and make sure I'm answering your questions concisely, because I I tend to be a little long-winded, which is fine sometimes, but other times, if we're running out of time, it's not fine.
So I'm going to conclude by asking you if there was a group of people who didn't know about Authentic Parenting, about the podcast. Two questions. Number one, how would you entice them to listen to it? What would you say? How would you market to them? How would you advertise? And number two, would you create a playlist, a sample of episodes for them to listen to? And what the episodes in that playlist would be composed of? Maybe, I mean, I'm sure you don't know the numbers or the names, but maybe
the themes
or things like that. Yeah.
Well, I think in terms of selling points, the communal aspect and the journey aspect of what your podcast and your community represents are two of the first things that came to mind. You know, the fact that you feel something I mentioned before, that you're not on your own, that helps you generate a little more compassion for yourself and for your child or your husband or your wife, depending on what your circumstances are. Hearing other people's stories and other people's challenges, I think, and knowing that they're out there and they're on the same journey as you are is very helpful. And having such a great guide as yourself, and knowing that you're so available and your heart is so open and willing to help them out. I would say that would be the selling point. I don't know that would be appealing to everyone, because I think most people are in the day in, day out rut of life, and they don't really feel that they have the time to dedicate to such an in-depth practice. But it would be for those that are willing to go on this journey of ups and downs, of having to forgive yourself, of being okay with imperfection, and in terms of reality, and the support that the community can give you, just in at least knowing that you're not alone. Those are the two selling points. And then podcasts that would be most appealing, or themes that would be most appealing. I think, again, most people tend to approach parenting in the way I used to, and the how can I get my child to do this? How can I stop my child from doing that? I don't know what to tell you there, because I've discovered through listening to you and trying to put good parenting practices, incorporating them into my life, is that there's no way to do that but to work on yourself and have compassion for your child, and try to see things from their perspective in that moment. So maybe it's a really good question. If I was someone that was coming into the quest of better parenting for the first time, I think maybe as a young parent, or the parent of a baby or a young child, a podcast about maybe self-compassion, maybe about finding who you are, so you can be respectful of the methodologies that might work best for you. Podcasts about self-discovery and finding out. I'm being repetitive now.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, that's great. It goes with the whole thing. Yeah, because I'm often asked to create a sample, a little playlist, for lack of a better word, and it's so hard, right? It's hard to, if there were like 20 items in the podcast, in the archive, I would choose like 3. But if it's like 7 years of content, it's very hard to put together like 10 episodes, a starter kit for someone. It's challenging, and of course we don't know what they are going through, what they're looking for. But I think your message is clear, and that would be my message too. Look for the episodes that are about self-discovery, self-understanding, because great parenting begins with knowing who you are. I think.
And part of that is also looking at the parts that you don't love so much, like my perfectionistic and controlling tendencies that are my biggest demons to date, right? You have to realize that that's a part of who you are. Maybe it's not your authentic self, but it's your current self.
It's part of you. I think Dick Schwartz's episode, the IFS work, is great for this parts work. I'm sure you listened to that episode.
I didn't understand that episode too well.
Yeah, because it was very practical for me. I took away a lot, but in short, we all have different parts, and these parts have developed throughout our life. You know, there are protective parts. There's the manager, there's the firefighter, there's the exiled parts that we exiled. And so like you have the perfectionistic part of you. That's not all of you, but it's just a part. And so it's not about demonizing the parts, but welcoming them and talking to them and integrating them. It's not making a smoothie from the parts, it's making a fruit salad, becoming harmonized and integrate all the parts of you. I think, self-love is a nice concept, is a nice notion. And it's like you said, it's in vogue right now. But I think to me, self-love begins in order to love yourself, you have to know yourself. And knowing yourself is not enough. You have to start accepting all parts of yourself. And once you start doing that, then you can love those parts. Once you accept something, then you can love. But just missing those two steps, self-understanding and self-acceptance, and accepting all parts of you, you cannot generate self-love. That's how I think about this process. Just saying, I love myself is not going to work if you're still judging the perfectionistic side of you. You know what I mean? I think self-love is a lot deeper. It's not like buying Gucci handbag for yourself or going somewhere expensive and saying this is self-love. You know, I see that on Instagram. Like, to me, it begins with self-understanding, accepting, because once you understand, right, then you can see that there are different parts of you. There's the perfectionistic, the control freak, the people pleaser, the compassionate one, the forgiving one, all parts of you. Then you can it's easy to love the compassionate part of you. You're like, I'm this kind of person. When we ask people, describe yourself, they usually say, that the compassionate part is them, or the loving part of it. That we choose the positive traits to identify that that's our authentic self. But the other parts are part of our authentic self too, right? The ones that we judge and we don't like or welcome. But then we need to be equally accepting and tender and caring for those parts so that we can be a whole human being and accept eventually, slowly, and extend love to those parts, and then fully love ourselves. I think that's the biggest work. That's the hardest work. It's not like easy 1, 2, 3-step process, but I see it as a 3-tier process.
Yeah. And it's kind of part of what I know I longed for from my parents, and maybe a lot of people might have longed for from their parents, and what they want to give to their kids is unconditional, right? So we kind of have to do that for ourselves too. We have to unconditionally love ourselves, regardless of those parts that, we're not too fond of in practicality.
Yeah, excellent point. Yeah, well said. Well, Ligia, thank you so much. From the bottom of my heart, you're my number one fan, number one listener, my friend, I don't like calling my listeners, the ones who are close to me, who are friends. I'm going to call you friend for a lack of a better word, but I don't view you just as a listener, which is like this cold term for me. You're more than a listener. There are listeners of this podcast, but the ones that I know and care about and I have connections with, I don't call them listeners. So you have a special place in my heart. I'm extending you a big hug, 20-second hug to get all the oxytocin and all the good things. Don't be hard on yourself and continue learning and growing, because it's a worthwhile journey.
Thank you so much, Anna. And you've definitely been a stellar guide for me in all of this. Your love and passion and intense concern for children is just palpable, and I appreciate you so much. Thank you.